Okay, well, hi you guys, welcome back. So it's time for the question and answer period, the question period. So if you have any questions, send me an email and you can put your name, you can request that I don't include your name, or you can even make up a name, as I am sure there are some made up names in here. So ask your questions for the next chapter and they could end up on one of my videos. So, all right, you guys, first question comes Daniel. Oh, I'm so excited. Okay, so from Daniel, to what extent was the American Revolution a counter-revolution to preserve America from anti-slave or from the anti-slavery movement in England? So I will reread that. I'm sorry, Daniel, for that. To what extent was the American Revolution a counter-revolution to preserve American slavery from the anti-slavery movement in England? So that is a really good question. So the American Revolution, I will say, was part of the revolution a counter-revolution to preserve American slavery from the anti-slavery movement? Okay, so I'll say yes and no. So I wouldn't say that it's a counter-movement to preserve American slavery from the anti-slavery movement in England. But yes, there was a part of the revolution, yes, that is a part of the counter-revolution. So as I stated in the PowerPoint or in the lecture, the Earl of Dunmore signs this proclamation in 1775 that encourages enslaved people to escape and fight for the British. And so because of this, a lot of Southerners will join the fight for independence because it's messing with their economic investment. Because if given the choice of staying enslaved and fighting and maybe getting freedom, a lot of people choose freedom. And so I wouldn't say it's a counter-revolution because of the anti-slavery movement in England. Is there an anti-slavery movement in England? Absolutely. England will abolish the slave trade before us. They will abolish slavery before us. A lot of nations will actually abolish slavery before we do. But it's more or less, I would say, Southerners are more concerned about making sure they keep their economic investment. Slavery was central to the Southern economy. Cotton, by the time we get to the 19th century, cotton becomes such a large investment that 75% of the world's cotton comes from the American South. It's about there being an economic investment. And so a lot of these Southern colonists will join the revolutionary cause because you have Great Britain who is offering freedom to enslaved people. So that is a part of it. I will say the American Revolution is not just one revolution. It's really multiple revolutions. We often study like what's going on with the taxes and no taxation without representation. But the other part of this movement is, what are we going to do about slavery? So there's actually a question here because I have to actually write the questions down to put them in the bag. So one of the questions that another student had actually kind of relates to this. I don't recall if the student put their name, but the question was there an anti-slavery clause in the Declaration of Independence? And if so, what happened to it? Well, yes. So the Declaration of Independence, the final document, is signed in 1776, July 4th, 1776, we get this Declaration of Independence. Well, this proclamation, Dunmore's proclamation, is passed in 1775. So when Jefferson writes this anti-slavery clause, it's met with a lot of conflict because you have some who refuse to sign the declaration if the clause remains in the declaration. So this anti-slavery clause, which really in essence blames King George III for the slave trade, for the transatlantic slave trade, they have to remove that to in order, I would say, to come up with a proper consensus to even get the Declaration signed. So, yeah, Daniel, that is an amazing question. I wouldn't say that it is a counter-revolution, yes, but it is not necessarily in response to there being an anti-slavery movement, because the proclamation didn't have anything to do with who deserves liberty. It's more or less, how can we push our cause? And so we know that really the main thing that the colonies have to make money is really these goods that are produced by slave labor. So if we can take away the labor, we're taking away, we're going to wrest control economically. So it doesn't have to necessarily do with an anti-slavery movement as much as how can we kind of strangle the colonies economically to prevent them from, doing well, to prevent independence. So hopefully that makes some sense. But please continue to send in some questions. I love answering these questions. So next question. Okay. The next question comes from a no name, which is fine. The mercantile system dictates that the colonies support England. Were these the first taxes levied on the colonists? So I'm going to assume that this student is talking about like the Stamp Act and things when we start the chapter in like 1765. So no, the Stamp Act is not, these acts are not the first taxes that have been levied on the colonies, because the colonies, remember, even with the Navigation Acts, everything had to be taxed. So taxes weren't new. It's just the way that these were handled, per se. They are being taxed directly, and there is no representation that comes with the taxes. Or comes with the taxation. So no, these are not the first taxes. It's just that they're being taxed and there's no sort of representation, and they are being taxed directly, and they know that they're being taxed directly to cover the cost of war. Okay, next question comes from another no name. Everyone wanted independence, so why didn't it happen sooner? So this is actually, I chose this question because I thought it was a great question, because a lot of people tend to think that everyone wanted independence. And so, I don't understand why it took so long and all these things. Not everyone wanted independence. That is the misconception, is that every colonial America or every colonial American wanted independence, and that's false. So many of these colonial Americans just wanted reconciliation. They didn't want necessarily, independence. They just believed that, the issue, the conflict could be fixed, instead of going to this quite drastic move of separating completely from Great Britain. So there's actually a movement of people who are more moderate, and so they're not necessarily for independence. And so this is what makes it's one of those things that also makes communication during this time very difficult. There were a number of spy rings, and George Washington himself was a part of a spy ring. Even though I know we have this, saying that's like George Washington, or this story with George Washington and the cherry tree, and he couldn't lie to his father, so he said, I cannot tell a lie, I chopped it down. And it's bull. George Washington, not only did he tell lies, he was very skilled at it, because he was part of a spy ring, and they had to have spy rings because they didn't know who they could trust, because everyone wasn't loyal to their cause. There were some people who were firmly loyal to British society. They wanted to remain aligned with the British crown. So yeah, that is false. A lot of people, not everyone was aligned with the cause of independence. Okay? This should be about the last question, because I think I answered the other one. So let me see. From Laura, was there an anti-slavery clause in the Declaration? This is the one we went over. So thank you, Laura, for your question. And so this is the final question from Homelander. So it looks like you also watch The Boys from Amazon, on Amazon Prime. It's a great show. I'm on season 2. I'm trying not to binge watch. So, from Homelander, did black enslaved people fight for the British or for the Americans in the Revolutionary War? Great question. So, the answer is both. So, as I said in the lecture, you had a regiment in Rhode Island. They actually had an all-black regiment. For black soldiers in the Revolutionary War. Also, again, George Washington, at first, he did not want to allow black soldiers into the army. However, after that proclamation in 1775, it's like you either allow them to fight with you or you have them fight against you. And so, the British, or blacks, will actually fight for the American side and the British side. A large number of American enslaved people will actually fight for the British, and after the Revolutionary War, they will actually leave America and they will go to Britain. They want their freedom. So if offered freedom, you have to look at the perspective of these enslaved people. And remember, if you are black in colonial America, we already have a racial caste system established where it doesn't matter who you are. Like, slavery is written into the law, race is written into the law, and the status of slave is a status that you keep in perpetuity. And so if an empire is offering you freedom, you're probably going to go with the freedom, because it's not just about your freedom, it's also the freedom of any offspring you have, because slavery is so pervasive that it dictates that any child born of an enslaved woman is automatically a slave, right? And so a number of blacks will fight with the British. A number of blacks will end up being given freedom, but you can't, if the freedom is not given by Americans, right, it's not going to be enforced. And so in order for them to actually have that freedom, they have to leave in order to have freedom. Okay, so that is the end of our questions. Again, if you have any questions, please send them in. I love answering your questions. There is no such thing as a dumb question. The only dumb question is the one that is never asked, okay? So I will see you guys next week. Remember, if you are not registered to vote here in the state of Texas, the voter registration deadline is coming up really soon. It's October 5th. I'll be putting voting information on your online learning platform. Remember, it's your vote, it's your voice. So, and remember, you guys, do your work. I'm really proud that you guys have been doing your work, and you guys have been really engaged. So I really love that. Keep these questions going. I love your engagement. Give yourselves a pat on the back for getting through this first part of the semester. I am incredibly proud of each and every one of you guys. So I'll see you next week. If you want office hours as well, send me an email. I have Zoom, and so we can do a face-to-face Zoom to Zoom face-to-face office hours. So I'll see you guys next week. See you later. Bye.